All right, guys. Today we're looking at the primary sources for this week for China. So the first one is the Mandate of Heaven. The Mandate of Heaven was created by the Zhou dynasty to justify breaking filial piety. They are also masters of propaganda. So some of this, it's definitely propaganda. They created it for that purpose, and they continued to use propaganda throughout their time, their rule, to try to get people to fall in line. Right, you have this pesky thing called filial piety when in terms of wanting to overthrow a king, because filial piety negates that idea. You have to be, the extreme loyalty and devotion, not just to your family elders, but to the state elders, which is definitely the king. And so then to say, well, yeah, but we kind of want to overthrow him, doesn't work with the concept of filial piety. So the Mandate of Heaven ends up being used as the justification to how to get around that whole pesky thing. It has consequences. Now, the Zhou are not going to be the only exclusive owners of this. Anyone can then bring up the Mandate of Heaven for why they're justified in overthrowing a king. And so you end up getting this kind of dynastic cycle that does emerge, because it's, a ruler takes over, they do well, they're popular, they have the Mandate of Heaven. They start to lose popularity, they are claimed to lose the Mandate of Heaven, and they're overthrown. And then the cycle repeats. Right, it's not to say, right, that the Shang took over from the Xia dynasty, that there wasn't other issues that allowed them to take over as well, but it's harder to justify if you don't have the Mandate of Heaven. So the Mandate of Heaven, really, its purpose was to justify Zhou control. And they were clever because they claimed the Xia dynasty wrote this. Like, oh, no, we didn't write this. No, this was already in play. We're just following it. So politicians for for sure. So we're gonna skip the first paragraph, just kind of the introduction to it. And we're gonna look at the second paragraph here. The Mandate of Heaven not only sets up that idea that a ruler has the mandate, and if they get overthrown, then they lost the mandate and it's been transferred to the new rulers. It also lists what makes a good king, what makes a bad king. And so it gives us, just like we looked at with Mesopotamia and what were the list of a good king, we get a sense here of what was valued for the good qualities and characteristics of kingship. And so it says that, if we look at here, and they do praise the Xia dynasty here. So, of the old former kings of the Xi cultivated earnestly their virtue, and then there were no calamities from heaven. The spirits of the hills, rivers, likewise, were all in tranquility, and the birds and beasts, the fishes, tortoises, and all enjoyed their existence according to their nature. So this is definitely this idea of that if you follow one, we get virtue listed here. But also that there's this connection that the Mandate of Heaven is connected to being in harmony with nature, right? But their descendants did not follow their example, and heaven sent down calamities, and employing the agency of our ruler who was in possession of its favoring appointment. Right, so that's the idea here, employing the agency of our ruler who was in possession of the favoring appointment, is that you are ruler doesn't want to write there. The ruler is given the Mandate of Heaven. Okay, so that it's the justification again. The king didn't lose because he was overthrown. No, what it's saying there is the heavens threw down the calamity. So it is, again, super clever, because the calamity might have been that we took over, but it was really heaven doing it. And then we now have the favor kind of thing. And so then it talks about, what was a good ruler in that sense. And so you get here, our king of Shang brilliantly displayed his sagely prowess. For oppression, he substituted his generous gentleness, and the millions of people gave him their hearts. So you also have now sagely prowess and generous gentleness. And so to set up love, you put that too. But it's more important too. It says to set up love, it is for your love to your relations. To set up respect is respect to your elders. These two things they're referring to here are definitely filial piety. Right? And so then it says, oh, the former king began, and with careful attention to the bonds that hold men together. He listened and did not seek to resist it. He conformed to wisdom of the ancients. He displayed intelligence, loyalty. He allowed the good qualities of men who he employed and did not seek that they should have every talent. So we also get, right, wisdom, listening, loyalty, intelligence. All of those are then good qualities. Seeking out wise men. He laid down punishments for officers and warned those who were in authority, right? So you could also add, you could add punishment in the terms, but not harsh, right? But that this is the idea that you hold people accountable. You expect them to behave. Then it lists the negative qualities, right? And they're using this in terms of the story that the king laid down punishments, saying, if you have constant dancing in your palaces and drunken singing in your chambers, this is called the fashion of sorcerers. If you dare set your hearts on wealth and women and abandon yourselves to wandering about to the chase, that's called fashion of extravagance. And if you dare to despise sage words, to resist the loyal and upright, to put it far from you the aged and virtuous, and seek the company of youths, this is called the fashion of disorder. So we have the bad, if you will, right? And there's three: fashion of sorcerers, which sounds more magical than it actually is. And then you have the fashion of extravagance. And then you have the fashion of disorder. Right? And so the idea is that with each of these, there were things for it. So fashion of sorcerers, it says dancing and drinking, and excessive. So this is the idea that you're partying all the time, right? He's just going around partying nonstop. Then you have fashion of extravagance, which is women and wealth. That your whole focus is on that rather than running a kingdom. And fashion of disorder is ignoring the wise, the wise and elders for youth. So that's like the king bringing in all of his young friends who have no knowledge and experience and understanding, and completely disregard the elders, which again is kind of like being foolish, not having integrity, not taking your job seriously, not being wise. All of those things kind of play a role into then what a bad king was. It also lists like with a minister who does not try to correct such vices shall be punished. So this one's interesting because filial piety kind of creates this like taboo to correct your elders. And here it is saying that they have an obligation to do so. Right? So that's it. So it gives us one, how the Zhou used propaganda, which I think it was very effective. It also gives us a good idea of what they saw as a good king versus a bad king, at least for the Zhou, but this stuck around. So obviously other dynasties accepted this, to a degree. We'll see the Shin dynasty, not so much. But to a degree, this stuck around and was used to kind of set the precedent for what was a good king versus what was a bad. Now we have Confucius. And there's a lot here, and I'm not going to read all over it because it would just be very, very long. But I'm going to point out some key points. So the titles help you because that can give you, just looking at the titles tells you things that are important. And if you're also seeking out specific ideas. So in filial piety, one, it shows that filial piety is part of that, right? And it says, in serving his parents, a son may remonstrate with them, but gently. When he sees that they do not incline to follow his advice, he shows an increased degree of reverence, but does not abandon his purpose. And should they punish him, he does not allow himself to murmur. So again, this is addressing that issue of the tricky situation of filial piety, which is how do you have filial piety and show obedience, but address when someone that's your elder is doing the wrong thing. And what Confucius says is that basically you should, let your parents know. But then if they choose not to follow that advice, he increases his reverence, his respect and obedience to them, but does not give up on his position. And if he gets punished for that, he accepts that. So it's this kind of weird balance on how to walk that line. And this worked. This definitely was part of the government. Because remember, I guess I didn't introduce this. I kind of went right into it. So let me introduce this real quick. Confucianism, it doesn't like it that way. Confucianism is definitely the idea that people are inherently good. And the goal is education to produce noble-minded or noble or good gentlemen. Noble-minded gentlemen or good gentlemen. And that these noble-minded gentlemen or good gentlemen would be part of the administration. Right, the government. I'll just put government. And that through virtue, there we go. So government there. And then the idea is that through virtue, that they would live and educate and study to get to be that. That way, I suppose. So you have virtue, you have the main values were courtesy, justice, and moderation. Okay. This is going to be important when we look at like legalism, and it's like fundamentally the opposite of Confucianism. But people are inherently good. So look at this in the context of that. And the other thing that I asked you, right, which is how is this used? This was written to try to get people to support the Zhou. It was written in response to the Warring States period, but it was definitely intentionally trying to reshape the Zhou government so that people would want to be invested, especially that part. They would want to be invested. What is the virtue of a good government? Well, if people are inherently good, then we can get them invested in the government. And if they're involved and they want to be involved, then they're not going to be overthrowing them because they're going to be invested in that. And so that's that kind of purpose of trying to end really warfare, instead creating peace and stability in the government. Specifically the Zhou for Confucius, but it really was how to end the conflict. How to create, how to have a philosophy that creates stability and peace, and possibly prosperity as well. So we had the filial piety one, right? And that's obviously a key aspect of it. Then this idea, right? If a man keeps cherishing his old knowledge so as continually to be acquiring new, he may be a teacher to others. That learning is a positive thing. in life. In the terms of the government, right, because I asked you specifically about that, he who exercises government by means of his virtue may be compared to the North Polar Star, which keeps its place and all the stars turned towards it. Right? Specifically, what does that mean? He who exercises the government by means of virtue can be compared to the North Star, where he keeps his place and all the stars turn it. So if you rule with virtue, all your other stars, which could be two things, your subjects or the vassal states, will be turned towards you, facing you, looking at you, not to overthrow you, but to follow your lead. You keep your place, right? And all the stars turn towards it. So he's advocating for this idea of ruling through virtue in order to have everyone else want to follow that example and that lead. If they be led by virtue, the uniformity sought to be given them by the rules of propriety, they will have the sense of shame and moreover will become good. So let's look at what the first part of this means, right? If the people be led by laws and uniformity, oh, no, it doesn't want to write. All right, hang on just a second. Okay, my pen died. The problem with using it and not charging it. Okay, so if the people be led by laws and uniformity sought to be given them by punishment, they will try to avoid the punishment and they will have no sense of shame. What's funny with this is that is legalism. So this is legalism. That's what legalism thinks. You punish people for not following the law, and then they'll be forced to follow it. Confucius says, nah, they'll just try to avoid it, and they're not going to feel bad about it. If they be led by virtue, so this is Confucianism, then uniformity sought to be given to them by the rules of propriety, right, proper behavior, they will have a sense of shame and will become good. So in that one little thing, we have what legalism decides to do, which is that, and him saying, no, that's not going to work. Because it has to be focused on a sense of self and wanting to do good. You can't, his is basically said the exact opposite. You can't force people to be good. They will have to want to be good. And people do. And so if we push that, people will be better governors. And the government will be better for it. Then he was asked how to cause the people to reverence their ruler, to be faithful to him, and to go on to nerve themselves to virtue. And he said, let the ruler preside over them with gravity, then they will reverence him. Let him be filial and kind to all, and they will be faithful. Let him advance the good and teach the incompetent, and they will seek to be virtuous. So here we have also a list of what a good ruler is, which is gravity, filial and kind, and good, and teaching. Right? If you do these things, people will seek to be virtuous. Again, eagerly seek to be virtuous. This is all about people wanting to buy into this, which we'll see the Han Dynasty ends up following. All right, if we skip a little bit, go down here. I'm going to go to this one here. Shisheng asked Confucius, saying, in what way should a person in authority act in order that he may conduct government properly? So again, what makes a good ruler? Let him honor the 5 excellent and banish away the 4 bad. So we get the good and the bad. This is going to, oops, everything, I can't keep anything where it's supposed to be today. All right, this is going to be the good, and then you're going to have the bad here. So, what are meant by the 5 excellent things? When a person in authority is beneficent without great expenditure. That's 1. When he lays tasks on the people without their repining, that's 2. When he pursues what he desires without being covetous, that's 3. When he maintains a dignified ease without being proud, that's 4. When he is majestic without being fierce, that is 5. So, right, when beneficent is like, so when someone is being generous but not excessive, right? When he lays on the people without their repining, when he lays tasks on them. So when he lays tasks on them without them complaining, when he pursues what he desires but isn't covetous of it, so he isn't greedy, when he's dignified but not overly proud, when he's kingly and meaning majestic but is not overly fierce and like the crazy type, right? So what makes a bad king? What are the 4 bad things? Again, this will sound familiar with legalism. To put the people to death without having instructed them, that is called cruelty. To require from them suddenly the full tale of work without having given them adequate warning, that's called oppression. To issue orders as if without urgency at first, and when the time comes to insist on them with severity, this is called injury. And generally in the giving pay or rewards to men, to do it in a stingy way. This is acting the part of a mere official, which is meant to be like a stinging rebuke on a mere official. So cruelty, right? Oppression, injury, mere official. But the idea of that you aren't instructing them, you aren't treating them well, you aren't being fair, right? Because each of those is connected to that idea of you put someone to death, but you didn't give them the instruction to behave the proper way. You expect people to work and do all this stuff, but to give them no warning. That's oppression. And then the other is that you don't act like something's important or urgent, and then you make them in trouble when they don't produce quickly. That's injury. And then giving rewards to people but in a stingy way is being stingy. It's being the mere official, but it means being stingy. Don't be stingy. And then you have the title, right? Virtue and goodness. Just the idea of moral and social obligation. Okay, we're gonna just, again, because I don't want this to end up being forever. That's I think those are the kind of the key things here. You can go through and it keeps talking about, right, how do you have virtue? This is all about virtue. What does it mean to have virtue? What does it mean to live properly? And kind of going back again to how the rulers and the government is supposed to be. But again, drawing on that idea of the official and the government all taking part in participating in that, and that, again, that people are inherently good, and you want to encourage them, inspire them to participate. All right, moving on to Taoism. Again, Taoism was also created during the Warring States period in a response to it. It was not just for the Zhou, though. So Confucianism was for the Zhou dynasty, and it was on purpose. Like, here, I give this to you, change your government this way, and people will want to participate in it rather than trying to overthrow you. Taoism was just created as a response to the Warring States period. And Taoism, right, it's the way or path specifically of nature. And this was supposed to be, it does talk about a ruler, right? The best ruler does little except for excessive action, whether it be out of good or bad intent. It ultimately was harmful to act as a ruler. So they do talk about the government. But the reality is that Taoism, while legalism and Confucianism were enacted into government practices and policies because it made sense as a philosophy not only for people to practice, but as a government policy, Taoism is not a practical government policy. So it's not surprising that it never became a government structure. It would be anarchy, and we'll see why in a minute. But Taoism became a really popular personal philosophy. The saying was Confucius by day, Taoist by night, right? That you were Confucius by day, because of the government and the policies and practices, and because that's what the state, China as the state, kind of expected or required it to be. In fact, Confucianism became the education policy in China. People were educated under Confucius principles and philosophies. So it makes sense why Confucius by day, but then Taoist by night is that in your personal life you practice Taoist philosophy. And for personal philosophy, I think it's fine. But we'll see why it doesn't work as a government, even though they address it. So, oops, I forget, not on the paper directly. So let's pick out the highlights again, just because of time. I don't want this to be way long. It's always gonna be longer than I can't help myself. It's always longer than I want it to be. But I want to make sure you understand this. All right. So let's look at this here. The structure of government. What one was this titled? Qualities of it. I'm skipping part of it. I'm going to look at the last part of the quality here. The sage controls without authority and teaches without words. Right, so that a wise person doesn't have to have authority to control, and he doesn't have to speak to have words. It's actions, right? And that's not bad, and that could be applied to the government just fine. The idea that if you go around being like, I'm in charge, oh, I got a better one, respect my authority, right? Cartman in South Park. If you go around constantly saying, respect my authority, you have to respect my authority, and you have to say that, or you do it by like being forceful and brutal, that's not control, right? You have control with a true wise person and leader is able to control things without having to push authority, and you're able to teach without words by actions, right? That's what that means. He lets all things rise and fall. Nature does not nurtures, but does not interfere. Gives without demanding, and is content. This is like that you're teaching, you're guiding's a better word. You're guiding, but not interfering. So this is where it gets a little bit trickier for a ruler. So you could make suggestions as a ruler, but you can't step in, or at least a good one, a good wise person. That's what they do. Nature, let's look at it because the way the path is connected to nature. Nature is not kind. It treats all things impartially. The sage is not kind and treats all people impartially. Nature is like bellows, empty yet supplying all needs. The more it moves, the more it yields. The sage draws upon the Tao in the same way and cannot be exhausted. Especially this part, right? This one's interesting because you just had one where it's talking about the leader not being too authoritative, and yet it's suggesting nature's not kind. They're impartial, and I think that's the focus, right? Impartiality is not always kind. And the wise person and the sage is the wise person or teacher, but also they're using this to connect to the ruler. A wise person is someone who is impartial. A ruler would be someone who's impartial, and that someone is not going to be viewed as kind. But at the same time, it's this idea that, right, the more it moves, the more it yields, that you don't stand in the way. So you might be impartial, but you're not immovable. You're not forcing your way. You remain impartial in everything you do. But that's going to be seen as not kind. And that, so, but this is very much that follow nature, right? What does nature do? That's how one should lead. That's how someone should attempt to follow life. And impartiality isn't a bad thing, but true, full impartiality can be cold. It just can. And it's suggesting nature doesn't care. And that's the what you should follow. Now, this nature is everlasting because it does not have a self. In this way, the sage serves his self last and finds it served first. So that's the idea of if you serve everyone else rather than your own interest, your interest will eventually be served. Distraction. This one is just that idea of excess is bad. Too much color blinds the eye, too much tone deafens the ear, too much taste dulls the palate, too much play maddens the mind, too much desire tears the heart. Just don't be excessive. Too much of anything is a bad thing, right? Because these aren't bad things. Color, tone, taste, play, desire. But too much of it becomes problematic about it. One of the things, this is good here just for showing how kind of hard to grasp Taoism is sometimes. Looked at but cannot be seen, it is beyond form. Listened to but cannot be heard, it is beyond sound. Grasped at but cannot be touched, it is beyond reach. These depthless things evade definition. Right? So like, well, okay, you can look at it, but you can't see it because it's beyond form, it's beyond sound, it's beyond reach. So you have this vague definition that, well, one, nature is beyond understanding, and the Tao is beyond understanding. That's also like annoyingly circular reasoning. Well, what is your main purpose? It's beyond reasoning. Okay. What are your main principles? It is beyond understanding. Wait, what? Okay, well, you can't tell me anything about it? Nope, it's beyond understanding. Right? The problem is this is too ethereal in the sense of like, there's no concrete, like, Confucius lays down, this is what a good ruler is, this is what a bad ruler is. And while Taoism does a little bit of that, the whole point is nature moves and flows and is fluid. It's constantly evolving and changing, and kind of like, imagine a river, and the waters flow unimpeded, undisturbed by those things around it. Likewise, someone following the Tao should be doing the same thing. But, and that, again, it can work for personal philosophy of trying to not have things bother you as much, trying to not push your way, trying to not serve yourself first, trying to lead by action, and not being forceful. But it ultimately doesn't give a concrete enough idea for leadership. And then we get to one that says, rulers here. The best rulers are scarcely known by their subjects. The next best are loved. So the best rulers is this one. I'll read the rest. The next best are loved and praised. The next are feared. The next despised. They have no faith in their subjects, so their subjects become unfaithful to them. When the best rulers achieve their purpose, the subjects claim the achievement as their own. So this is the function. This is the how. If they're like, okay, how are rulers supposed to be? Here's your structure of government, right? The best rulers are scarcely known by their subjects. And then it kind of lists the next in the order. Then those who are loved and praised, then feared, then despised. But because they have no faith in their subjects, the people will be unfaithful to them. Rulers achieve their purpose when your people see it as theirs. Now, that's not inherently a bad thing, to encourage people and inspire people to want to be involved so that your successes they feel are their successes, that they achieve stuff. But it also suggests somewhat a sense of anarchy if the ruler is not supposed to be seen, the ruler is not supposed to put any control, the ruler is not supposed to interfere, the ruler is not supposed to be there. The best ruler is one that no one knows about. Well, how much are you going to get done in terms of controlling an empire if you don't really exist? That's the problem, and it's why this one was so unattractive to rulers, because it really lessened their authority. But it also would have made it hard to, if you really were trying to follow Taoism, to enact policy and control in any kind of way, if you were truly trying to follow it, in that sense. If we could discard wisdom and sagacity, then people would profit 100-fold. If we could discard duty and justice, then loving relationships would form. If we could discard artifice and profit, then corruption and theft would disappear. This is like the opposite of Confucianism, right? Get rid of wisdom and sage. Get rid of people would be wealthier. If you got rid of the sense of duty and justice, which also this is suggesting in somewhat of an filial piety, by the way, right? Then people, if they weren't bound, and it makes sense to a degree, right? Because it's saying if they were not bound by duty and justice, then true loving relationships would form, because true loving relationships are being hampered by duty and justice, which make you obligated to show deference to relationships to your family. If there's no requirement of deference, then when you show it, that's true loving relationship. So, I mean, that totally makes sense. It's just very different from Confucianist thought, and even legalism in that sense. Okay, so that's what we're going to do with that one. So just keep in mind with this, again, I asked the question, these all three have the same purpose. They're very, very different. You can see Taoism is very different from Confucianism. Yet they all wanted the same thing. That they believed that this philosophy would help prevent warfare and would create stability and peace and prosperity, especially stability and peace. They all were, that was for all three of these, that was the goal. They just went about it in very, very different ways. So legalism ends up first being practiced by the Shen dynasty in full-fledged legalism. What's going on with this? There we go. So the Shen dynasty embraced legalism, and the Han dynasty after them is going to create a synthesis of it. They're going to take some aspects of legalism and a lot of aspects of Confucianism and merge them together to create a very strong government. Pure legalism doesn't work. It's too oppressive. People ultimately hate the government and the rulers, and they will revolt, because any government that is overly oppressive eventually will fall. It's just the nature of things, because no one likes being tortured and beaten down and attacked. Legalism is the opposite of Confucianism. People are inherently bad, right? People are inherently bad. So you have to force them to be good. Remember, Confucianism was people are inherently good, and use that to invest and instill an idea of being and virtue through the government and participating in the government. In this one, and the people will love you for that if you support those ideals and virtues. Here, it's people are horrible, people suck, and so they're like children, and we have to force them to be good. So they're still wanting, like this is the argument though, that all this warfare is happening because of that exact reason. People suck, and until someone actually steps in and forces them to be good, there's going to be warfare. There's only going to be peace once you force it out of them. And I suppose that negative view isn't horribly unreasonable after, hundreds of years of warfare. The Warring States period was a long time. It's not entirely surprising that people got jaded by that. And basically it's like, all I see is people sucking, because everyone is greedy and bad. And so clearly, if we want the fighting to stop, we're just going to have to force them to do so. But this just allows for rulers to take advantage and abuse the system and treat people like crap. There are some benefits to it as well. It's not in here, so I'm just gonna write a few key ideas here, and then we'll look at the key principles. So legalism ends up creating, and we'll see this in there, uniformity. And uniformity does lead to some benefits. You're going to have a massive aspect of building projects. The first part of the Great Wall of China, the palaces, the terracotta warriors. You have uniformity in weights, in currency, in a variety of other types of things, writing. All of these things are not bad. These are good things. Where it can be bad is in education and thought. And so, because this then becomes, you don't do this, you get punished. And punished was forced labor and death and torture. Okay, and this will be how the Shin dynasty kind of follows that. So let's look at how we see those principles applied in here. No country is permanently strong, nor is any country permanently weak. If conformers to the law are strong, the country is strong. If conformers to the law are weak, the country is weak. This, it's legalistic, means a focus on laws. Laws are the fundamental thing that you enforce. Oh. Go back. I'm having trouble with getting randomly going places. There's this idea that, right, laws and upholding those laws equals strong country, right? You have to almost viciously uphold those laws. Any ruler able to expel private crookedness and uphold public law finds the people safe and the state in order. Any ruler able to expunge private action and act on public law finds his army strong and his enemy weak. So find out men following the discipline of laws and regulation. Again, that's this. And place them above the body of officials. Then the sovereign cannot be deceived by anyone with fraud and falsehood. This is nobility. That was another thing, that legalism is merit-based. People should be put into their position based on their actions, not by birth, which isn't a bad thing. But they didn't like, they're claiming officials constantly have fraud and falsehood. And so you have to, you place people in charge that like laws and regulation and are disciplined to follow laws and regulation. They will be valuable. They won't backstab you. They won't betray you, unlike the officials who are full of fraud and falsehood. The legalism was very anti-nobility, and promoted people based on merit. So that's not a bad thing. But when you kill a whole bunch of other people to do it, then it becomes a bad thing. Therefore, the intelligent sovereign makes the law select men and makes no arbitrary promotion himself. Again, you don't select based on nobility or family favorites. He makes the law measure merits and makes no arbitrary regulation himself. In consequence, able men cannot be obscured, bad characters cannot be disguised. Again, this isn't horrible advice in that term of, like, you're not going to have horrible, crappy people that are only in that position because of family. To govern the state by law, again here, focus on law, is to praise the right and blame the wrong. The law does not fawn on the noble. Whatever the law applies to, the wise cannot reject, nor can the brave defy. Now here we get into, so no special favors, right? Punishment for fault never skips ministers. Reward for good never misses commoners. Which is a good thing, right? Because there were too often in not just Chinese history, but in a lot of societies, that people who did bad, but because of nobility, didn't get punished, and commoners didn't get praised and promoted. Therefore, to correct the faults of the high, co-rebuke the vices of the low, to suppress disorders, to decide against mistakes, to subdue the arrogant, to straighten the crooked, and to unify the forkways of the masses, nothing could match the law. Again, this is just a negative view, though, of people, right? It's all the negatives of people. None of the positives. It's all the bad things you have to weed out, which goes to that idea that people are inherently bad. To warn the officials and overawe the people, to rebuke obscenity and danger, and to forbid falsehood and deceit, nothing could match. Penalty. So then this is the punishment part. If penalty is severe, the noble cannot discriminate against the humble. If law is definite, then the superiors are esteemed and not violated. And then here's the two handles is really, this is again, the punishment is a requirement. The two handles, the means whereby the intelligent ruler controls his ministers, are two handles only. Okay, so that's going to tell us what two handles means, right? They are chastisement and commendation. So they're what the two handles mean. This is the two ways that you control people. What are meant by chastisement? To inflict death or torture upon culprits is called chastisement. Okay, I have a different definition of chastisement, which is like a bad scolding, like You weren't listening. You need to do better. Apparently, their definition of chastisement is torture and death. That's a harsh chastisement. But again, that's what legalism is. But I always think it's funny that the term chastisement, because you chastise someone. You're according to, if you were in Shin Dynasty, I have to chastise my ministers today. Oh, were they, give them a good talking to? Oh no, torture and death. So yeah, different definition of what chastisement means than the legalism in the Shin Dynasty. To bestow encouragements and rewards on men of merit, again, focus on that, is called commendation. So you do both of these things. So there is some reward system for following uniformity and the policy of the leaders. But it was way more heavily focused on chastisement, which meant torture and death, than it was on the other. Right, it says ministers are afraid of censure and punishment, but fond of encouragement and reward. If the Lord of men uses the handles of chastisement and commendation, all ministers will dread his severity and turn to his liberality. So again, it's the idea of being super severe with what you do with punishment, so that people don't want to go against it, that they're afraid to. Okay, so I mean that's legalism. That's it. So that's the philosophies. We are going to look at one other thing, which is the primary source for women, Banjiao, lessons or admonitions for women. I can speak. It's also called Lessons for Women. I'm going to we're going to skip this one here, the shorter ones, and we're going to look at the longer section. So one of the things with women in China is it was very strict. It was patriarchal, patrilineal, patrilocal. Very, very strict. Ancestor worship, yes, it did give women an advantage in terms of that a grandmother would have to be treated with filial piety and respect. But ancestors were always an emphasis on the men. In fact, when the wife got married, she went over and performed a ceremony, and her ancestors now were her husbands, no longer her parents' ancestors. So you literally gave up your ancestors when you got married as a woman, because all of the ancestors that mattered were the men's, the husbands. There also was this sense of that women were supposed to be self-effacing. So you get this, right, her introduction. This Banjiao was a super intelligent woman who was highly educated and took part in the Han court as like a librarian, historian, educator. As a woman, that was huge. That was not a normal step. Now, wealthier women in China did have more freedoms, and the education was looked on favorably for wealthier women. Nonetheless, to still have that high of a position was a big deal for women. And yet she starts out, this lowly one is ignorant and by nature unclever. So that alone right there should show you that this was expected. Now, she's not going to believe this, and she has some undertones of pushing for women for more education and equality, but she has to do it in a very subtle way. Because if she just came out and said, hey, women need to be educated, women should be treated fair in marriage, women should be equal, then she would have been laughed out, because it definitely was, women were seen as lower than men in Chinese society, for sure. And it was written about and talked about a lot. You also see in other things where it talks about women as being uneducated or stupid or inferior to men. So she comes out but again, that there was praise to this whole self-effacing nature. So this lowly one is ignorant and by nature unclever. Like that alone should give you a view of how ancient Chinese society viewed women. I was favored because of my ancestry and relying on the teachings of a governess and instructress. She got married at 14, right? I clutched the dust basket and the broom in the cow household. That's saying she got married. But again, look at what it is suggesting for marriage, right? It's domestic. Women's role in China was the domestic sphere. Cleaning the kitchen, cooking, raising the children, sweeping the house. And there is a huge emphasis on this in Chinese. Because technically you could say women everywhere in the world. For most of world history, this has been the role of women. But it's more pronounced in the descriptions in China, for sure. India, in the earlier years, you see it with the laws of Manu as well. Similar kind of concept. In China, it stays a little more consistent, right? We don't have as many variations as we do with India. Then she says, I'm older now and I'm anxious for my daughters. This is meant to be letters for her daughter to marry. And she says, basically, I feel like I haven't instructed you correctly, so I'm urging you to study how to be a proper woman and wife. Humility. So this is important. This actually sets up and gives us another good look into the role of what the expected roles of women were supposed to be in China. On the third day after the birth of a girl, the ancients observed 3 customs. First, for 3 days to place the baby below the bed. Second, to give her a spindle with which to play. And third, to fast and announce her birth to her ancestors by an offering. So what does that mean? And this one has I don't like this translation. The spindle is in the other translation. I'm just gonna put it on here. They say pottery shard, which is a broken piece of pottery. Okay, on the third day after birth, she's given things. First, for 3 days, the baby's placed below the bed. Then a spindle or pottery shard to play with, and to fast and announce her birth to her ancestors. The last one's normal. That one's not necessarily, you did that with boys too. So then she explains what it means though, so I don't have to, do you? I'll just read the next part. Now, to lay the baby below the bed plainly indicates she was lowly and humble, and it should be regarded as her prime duty to submit to others. Submission and deference were already part of filial piety, and it got reinforced way more for women than it did for men. So, right, they're saying, from birth, girls were placed under the bed for several days to show that they were lowly and humble, and they were to submit to others as their main duty. To give her a spindle or pottery shard with which to play signified she should be accustomed herself to labor and consider it her prime duty to be industrious. To announce her birth before her ancestors meant her prime duty was the continuation of ancestral sacrifices. The third one's more normal for men and women. But the pottery shard was meant to be domestic industriousness. And I think that's important, again, in how this translation did it, is the domestic aspect of that as well. Pottery, right? You tend to have that be connected to domestic industriousness. And then it says, here's how ancient customs epitomize a woman's ordinary way of life and how she's supposed to live. Let a woman modestly yield to others. Let her respect others. Let her put others first, herself last. Oh gosh, this is such a huge one. Women were expected to serve themselves last in every way. First to rise, last to bed, that type of philosophy. Should she do something good, let her not mention it. Should she do something bad, let her not deny it. Let her bear contempt. Let her even endure when others speak or do evil to her. It's right, if she does this, then she may be said to be humble herself before others. But it's definitely this, and she even says, let a woman retire late to bed, but rise early to her duties. Right? It's this a whole idea of women as in domestic service to everyone else. Again, this is not as bad as the laws of Manu, but it's not like, it's bad comparatively in the sense of like what rights and respect and equality that they had compared to like Mesopotamia and Egypt. Mesopotamia and Egypt, women had so many more rights and were seen in a higher, even if they were under men, were still seen as higher in status than what we're seeing here. Although she was not only very wealthy, but was very well educated and served the court. So you have this contradiction too of how women were discussed in public and in culture versus how some women, what they were actually able to do in society. And that's not always abnormal in that sense. husband and wife. So here's one of the things where it's she's challenging the status quo. Let's find where it is. Here we go. Now examine here. Sorry, making sure I have the right spot. Now examine the gentlemen of the present age. They only know that wives must be controlled and that the husband's authority must be maintained. They therefore teach their boys to read books and study histories, but they do not in the least understand how husbands and masters are to be served or how rights and right principles are to be maintained. Yet only to teach men and not to teach women? Is this not ignoring the reciprocal relationship between them? According to the rights, book learning begins at the age of 8, and at the age of 15, one goes off to school. Why, however, should this principle not apply to girls as well as boys? So she's clever here because she's advocating for education for girls, but she's using it because you can't just come out and say like, well, women should be educated equally to boys. So she's saying in order to serve husbands better, girls need to be educated so when they get married they can serve their husbands better. It's a clever way to use the current system and expectation of women to try to promote an increased status of education. So she is pushing and challenging the status quo. She was incredibly clever because a lot of this comes off as just like, oh, women are lowly, and she probably believed in some of the expectations of what a woman was because that was very much indoctrinated to the culture. But at the same time, she's using that then to advocate for girls to have education. And then she advocates to, as well, for a mutual respect and love and treatment in the marriage. Okay, right here. If a wife does not restrain her contempt for her husband, then it will be followed... Why'd that just disappear? If a wife does not restrain her contempt for her husband, then it will be followed by scolding and shouting from him. If a husband does not restrain his anger, then there is certain to be beating of the wife. So one, she's going to advocate against spousal abuse. Well, mostly wife spousal abuse. The correct relationship between husband and wife is based upon harmony and intimacy, and conjugal love is grounded in proper union. If it comes to blows, how can the proper relationship be preserved? If sharp words are spoken, how can conjugal love exist? If love and proper relationship are both destroyed, then the husband and wife are parted, even if they still physically live together. So here again, she's advocating saying men should not be hitting their wives, and they should have harmony and intimacy and love. That is a proper relationship, which means don't be yelling at each other, don't be hitting each other. There needs to be harmony and respect for it. So that's another way that she was progressive in a lot of this, pushing for education for girls, pushing back against it, of saying it's acceptable for husbands to hit their wives. And then you have womanly behavior, womanly virtue, womanly speech, womanly appearance, and womanly work. And here you have to guard her chastity, to control her behavior and every motion exhibit modesty. That's womanly virtue. To choose her words with care and avoid vulgar language, to speak at appropriate times and not be offensive. That's womanly speech. Right? To wash and scrub dirt and grime and to keep clothes and ornaments fresh, clean, to wash and bathe. That's womanly appearance. Basically, this one just means be clean. Seriously, today I cannot stop touching other things. I mean, womanly appearance is basically like, bathe, please. I always find that one funny. Like, shouldn't the men be bathing too? With wholehearted devotion to sew and weave. Wholehearted devotion. Enjoy sewing and weaving, not to love gossip and silly laughter, and cleanliness and order. Serving guests. That's womanly work. Okay, so this also gives us 4 kind of ideals of how, what are the ideal components of women, which again are to be reserved, to be quiet, to be passive, to submit and serve other people. And that very much was part of the role of women in Chinese society. But you do have these 2 areas where she was challenging some of that. So it's not all just in line with what, like, you have all this stuff that she's aligning with traditional Chinese rules and values of women, and yet she's also trying to promote some change by connecting in a way that would be acceptable to people. So it isn't a very clever how to try to enact that change. Because again, if you just came out and said, equality for all, women are equal, people would be like, nah. But if you put it in terms of, hey, this is beneficial to what you guys, what society sees as the role of women, people will be like, oh, right, that makes a better wife. Okay, yes, we need to educate women. Or, oh, right, we shouldn't be hitting our wives, because that makes a lack of harmonious marriage, which is part of the yin and yang of what you're supposed to do. Oh, okay, right? And then in the end, you get a change, an outcome that you want from it. So it's, like I said, an interesting mix here of both. So hopefully that helps and it makes sense with those. Gives you a better view of women in China, as well as the philosophies and kind of, those philosophies carried over and continued through the various dynasties.